hear me, so whenever you're ready.
Okay, well, before he was so rudely interrupted, Bill was talking a little bit about his background and about Seton Hall.
Okay, so we'll listen to...
So you didn't miss a lot. Go ahead, Bill.
Okay. Hey, Fred. There's a great audience here. Let's see. So I wanted to start by talking about the origins of this project. It was about 5 years ago that an animated movie called Shark Tale was coming out. Some of you may have seen it, and there was an uproar among the Italian-American organizations because the characters of the sharks, all were bad guys, all had Italian names. All right, so these fish with Italian names and why Italian and so. And one of the people leading the drive to condemn DreamWorks for putting together this movie was a Seton Hall alumnus. And he made an impassioned phone call to me one day, and I listened and began thinking imaginatively about what could be done to assist him, but from an academic as opposed to a kind of activist or political role, which is not the sort of thing I'd like to get into anyway. And it occurred to me that for years I'd been hearing from Italian-American friends stories, some of them decades old, of being denied promotions, of ethnic slurs, and then things that one would read about from time to time in the newspaper. And I also had always observed that there really wasn't a history of this, of anti-Italian prejudice in the United States, to compare with the sorts of things that have been written about African Americans, or about Jewish Americans, or about the Chinese, or about Latinos. And it became a kind of puzzle for me. Why haven't Italians written such a history? Okay? Not as an effort of complaining. In fact, as one reads the book that we put together, you'll see that in many ways it's a positive history. Things did get better for Italians in the United States. That's unquestionable. But there's a history of how things got better, and also a history of how bad things were, that hasn't been studied by historians of the Italian-American experience, who have instead focused on questions of neighborhood, family relations, religion, ritual practices, all valid and very important areas of the Italian-American experience, but the history of how Italians were received and the negative images of Italians is one that historians have avoided until now. And so I put together a conference with the help of Fred and with the help of Dominic, who was then executive director of the American Italian Historical Association. And we'll be showing in a few minutes a 10-minute version of the 30-minute documentary that we filmed at the conference. It'll just give you a taste of what went on at the conference. Then we also edited, Fred and I, this volume of essays by scholars, writers, talking about the history of this experience of Italians in this country. And it's the first history of anti-Italianism that has been published to date. There's only one collection. It's an anthology of newspaper articles done by Salvatore Lagumina, a book called WAP, History of Anti-Italian Prejudice in the United States. But it's not really a history. It's just photocopies or retyped articles anthologized from episodes in the past. It's a wonderful teaching tool, but it doesn't offer analysis and discussion the way that the essays in our book do. My own contribution, I'm an expert in Italy from about 1500 to 1800. My own contribution in the book regards early Italian anti-Italian prejudices in the United States. And the original argument that I think I bring to the project is to point out that the experience of Italians in the United States was shaped in many ways by the negative images of Italians that existed in this country before Italians even began arriving in large numbers in the 1870s and 1880s. So I chart a history that begins with negative views of Italy in England that you find, for instance, in Shakespeare's plays. Think of all of the things that go wrong in Shakespeare's Italian plays. Think of Romeo and Juliet, Crips and Bloods, right? Think of Othello, questions of race and jealousy. Shakespeare presents an Italy in which personal honor and family honor matter more than the community and matter more than justice. Okay? All those things are projected onto Italy. That's one element in the negative views of Italy that were circulating before Italians arrived here. It's interesting that for reasons that are understandable, after the Holocaust, the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith protested against productions of The Merchant of Venice. And this lasted down until the 1980s, when there were protests against showing a BBC production of The Merchant of Venice on PBS. You can't imagine Italian-American organizations protesting the production of Romeo and Juliet anywhere. But yet there are images of Italians that are projected through Shakespeare's plays that help shape and helped shape in the past perceptions of Italians. Another element of this negative view of Italians is tied to the economic history of Italy. There's an old story which is that when explorers discovered routes to India and the New World around 1400, Italy went into economic decline as it lost its monopoly over the spice trade. New research shows that Italy remained prosperous all the way down until the 1620s, 1630s, when the country went into a huge catastrophic decline, marked by famines, by disease, episodes of plague, the need to build huge orphanages in Naples and Venice to deal with all of the unwanted children. Italy in the 1600s, from being home of the Renaissance, goes into a really sharp decline, much sharper than any historian had thought in earlier decades. And so this sharp decline in Italy, which suddenly becomes this needy, awful receptacle of human misery in Europe, coincides precisely with the settling of North America. When North America is settled in the 1600s, all of the stories in the newspapers about Italy are about disaster. Bands of brigands, robbing, killings, rapes, terrible, terrible stuff coming out of Italy. So that there's a nice, an unfortunate coincidence of the economic decline and the history of the settling in North America. And an interesting aspect of the negative images of Italians before the age of mass immigration can also be found, and this is some more recent work that I've been doing that's not incorporated into this book, but it's part of a future project. We can trace by looking at images of Italians in 19th century paintings and photos before Italians began coming to this country in large numbers. And here we can go through some slides if that's possible.
Okay, well,
maybe if I say
get rid
forward.
of Fred.
Oh, sorry, Fred.
You won't be able to be seen, Fred, but
That's okay, I can listen.
okay. Let's see now. We have to. Okay, and we are where? Are these scenes?
Yeah, there you go. All right. So I've been collecting images, paintings that circulated in Europe and in America of Italy. These aren't works of great art. You don't find many like this in the Art Institute of Chicago or the Metropolitan Museum of Art. They're generally called examples of genre painting, but they show the popular tastes and popular images of what Italy was like. Can I say next slide, Dominic?
Sure,
And
okay.
there are about 15, 20 of them, all right? But we'll go through some of them quickly. These are peasant scenes from the backcountry of Naples, the first ones that we saw. The next one, another one. So there's a rustic simplicity, kind of. There are a lot of paintings like these. If we move on to the next, you'll also find lots of beautiful women. This is a woman named Teresa. Again, backcountry Naples. Next one. Another one. They seem almost out of magazines. You know, there's something, and yet these are the 1820s, 1830s, 1840s. Notice the dress. Artists are always happy to have women take their clothes off. What's interesting here is that she's wearing the same kind of peasant dress at the right that the other women were wearing, rather than representing a Greek god or goddess. It's not a mythological scene. It may say something even about the moral character of Italian women, if we move on. And then scenes of the Bay of Naples, next. Musicians, next. Now, we start to come across something that's very interesting, which is these paintings often have titles that seem a little odd. The title of this painting is Scene of Brigands. Brigands, robbers from the countryside, and yet there's only one man. If we move to the next one, we have more scenes. Fortune teller, next one. Fortune teller. Now we have a brigand by himself. Next, another scene of brigands. Just one man. The woman, the fortune teller, we've already seen, painted by a different artist, but the model is circulating. So these are staged scenes. They're obviously not photographs of real brigands. They're people being portrayed playing brigands for the painter. This scene of brigands. Brigands dancing. All right. This I like to think of as being similar to the wedding scene in Godfather Part 1. Sort of Italians dancing and having a great time, and yet they're brigands. All right, they're robbers. Next one. This painting is called Brigand's Wife, and clearly they're taking scenes and putting the word brigand in just to help the painting sell. It's part of the image of what this dangerous Italian countryside is, with its charms but its perils. Brigand and his wife. And then we have three dramatic scenes, again, of the brigand. Notice that the brigand is portrayed, we saw one by himself, but he's portrayed again and again with his wife, with his children. There's something about the family that is connected to the image of the Italian rural criminal. In these paintings from the 1820s and 1830s, that's in so many ways anticipates stereotypes that we're familiar with from movies, American movies of the 1970s. Again, the brigand and his wife, and then finally the wife discovering her husband, the brigand, shot. Okay. Next scene. Here we have brigands debating what to do with a hostage, with a captive, whether to throw him off and kill him or hold him for ransom. Next. These are scenes from the Spanish painter Francisco Goya. The Spanish also had problems with brigands. These paintings, though, were very influential for the later ones that we saw. These are from around 1800. First was the brigands capturing a family. And you see at the right the man blindfolded. Next one, the disrobing of his wife. Next one, the rape and death of his wife. They're horrible stuff. And these were the images that were. So we move on next. Now we have Italian brigands fighting over the scene is showing them fighting over the wife. The husband's dead, and then this big painting in the Cleveland Art Institute. of brigands who are playing mora. It's like the old game, once, twice, three, shoot, you know, over who will have the man's wife, who's there in the middle holding her face in her hands. Next slide, Dominic, we have children playing mora, and next slide, we have Italian-American men, whom I know, playing mora. Next one, you see the drama of the scene. Now these paintings would be on display, and they would travel, and people would pay to go into them, even as part of circus exhibits. That's part of the popular image of Italy. Yes?
Now, were these shown in America or in Italy?
Both. No, not in Italy.
In America.
These were brought to Paris
Ah.
and London and America,
At the
and they would
exposition.
circulate at galleries and exhibitions. Yeah. Next. Now this is the age in the 1860s. Suddenly you have photos, and it's fascinating to compare the photos with the paintings. Huh? So we have in the 1860s a great age of real brigandage that Americans were all reading about, these bands of brigands in the hills in the Abruzzi and Calabria and in Lucania after unification. They were rebelling against the northern Piedmontese government. So we have more, look at, they're hamming it up for the photographer. You see these brigands are. The next one, and this is a fabulous picture of the famous Brigantessa, the female bandit chief, who was later shot by the government. And they actually took photographs of her nude body to prove that she was dead, which I'm not going to show you, but it's horrible. And then we have more brigands, and then one more. And this is a picture of the heads of peasants cut off and left by the northern government to show you how brutal the suppression of this civil war of brigands was in southern Italy. They cut off the heads of peasants and exposed them to tell villagers not to supply the brigands in the countryside the way that the government thought that this had been happening. These are scenes, and the message here is how very close we are to scenes that one sees today on HBO involving Italians. And yet these were here, all present and circulating and read about by Americans before Italians got off the boat. When in the New York Times, in other newspapers, they suddenly start complaining about the immigrants now coming in for the first time from Calabria, from Naples, from Sicily. And so I'll stop there, and maybe it's time to pass to Fred or to Dominic, however Dominic
Well, let's
would
go
like
to Fred. If we can find him here. Fred, are you?
I'm here.
Listen, we've got to close everything out here. Oh, I think we might be getting close. Okay, there's this.
far left, maybe.
Learn how to call? Okay.
Or maybe he's here.
Okay. Oh, there you are. What were you doing, Fred?
I've been here listening.
You're backlighted a little bit. We have to call in your lighting specialist.
What does that mean?
There's a lamp that is in the back of you that is making you look dark on our screen.
Is that better?
You have the wrong color shirt on, but
I think he's a film producer.
Oh, Dominic, you give him a movie camera, he becomes Francis Ford Coppola. Hi, well, thanks for coming out tonight. I don't know what the weather's like there. Here, it's almost like spring. It's 50 degrees out here.
yeah.
This is a book that I think was deep in the back of the minds of a lot of people for years. But a lot of people were afraid to talk about these things. Bill presented a very eloquent reasoning for why this might be. And I think a lot of times Italian Americans don't know quite why they are stuck with this image, except that it just keeps repeating. And actually, I'm going to be in Chicago on February 20. This is a little advertising, but I'm going to be giving a talk at the University of Illinois at Chicago sometime, I think, early afternoon on Friday, February 24th. And the theme of my talk is going to be the extension of my work from this book to what I'm working on now, just as Bill is expanding his work that we did in this book. And my talk is going to be on the fear of being Italian American. What has that fear, where did the fear come from, and what has it cost us in terms of being a cultural body in the United States that constantly gets misrepresented? Even sometimes when our own artists get involved. And so this is the main concern I have. And I think fear, from what I can understand, I've been doing a lot of reading on just fear in general. Fear is based on ignorance, or a lot of fear is based on ignorance, which is, you don't know what's going to happen, so you imagine all kinds of things, and so you then act or don't act based on that ignorance. And I think, to me, this is one of the major things we find inside the Italian American community is a not knowing of what happened in the past, or a distorted version of what happened in the past. And I remember when I used to go to my grandmother and ask her about Italy, she says, "Oh, that was miseria, I don't want to talk about it." So it was either not talking about it, or when they did talk about it in Italian dialect, which I was the oldest one in my family. I was the only one in my family to really begin to understand dialect. And then by the time I learned Italian, all the people who spoke dialect couldn't understand what I was saying. My grandmother, I once asked her a question in Italian, she answered me in English, and I asked my uncle, why did Grandma answer me in English? I've just spent all this time studying Italian. He says, "You sound like a priest." So my Italian was above hers, and so she was afraid in that instant to respond to my Italian, because it was the sound of authority. And what Bill had been saying about all these images of the brigands, there's a new book that has come out called Terroni. It was a bestseller in Italy. It was just recently translated by Bordighera Press by Pino Aprile. So if you're looking for it in Italian or in English, you can find it both on Amazon.com. And what he does is he goes into the response of the Italians in Italy when the North became the kind of focus for the unification of Italy, what has been called the Risorgimento. And these brigands that you see in these images and then later on in these photos were actually people. I mean, they weren't necessarily robbers, although some of them were, and some of them did use thievery in order to be able to sometimes just to survive. But these were common people who had had enough of the repression and the kind of exploitation of the South by the North. And they always get portrayed through the kind of mainstream Italian media as these criminals. And of course, they were criminals in terms of what Northern law was all about, but many of them were our relatives. There used to be this phrase, brigante o immigrante. Either you stay here and you fight for what you need, what you deserve, or you leave. And, a couple of the reasons why Italy didn't have, Bill was much better about this than I am in terms of his background. You didn't have the kind of revolutions in Italy that you had in France, was because so many people answered the question by leaving. One of the greatest mass emigrations from a country occurred between 1880 and 1920 from Italy. And you know, we know the statistics that if all the Italians who had come to the United States would have stayed, we would have been the largest. Over 50% returned and went back to Italy. And today when you go to Italy, I mean, I remember when I first went back to Italy, I couldn't understand why my grandfather left. This was a beautiful country, the food was fantastic, the people were great, you know, why would he ever want to leave it? Well, that was not the Italy that he left. And it took me all these years of reading, writing, and studying to figure that out. And bringing it back to the United States is like somebody, I don't know if you know the analogy of Plato's cave, but there's a guy, everybody is inside Plato's cave and they're all strapped, looking at the same images being presented by them through shadows. And to them, that's the reality. One guy breaks away and he leaves the cave and goes outside and then comes back and says, hey everybody, there's this great world out here, you have to see it. And they end up killing him because they don't believe that that world exists. And to me, that's what Italian-American scholars have been like. They've been the people who kind of broken away from the way Italians have consistently been, or I should say Italian-Americans, have consistently been perceived and the way they have perceived themselves. So much so that many, many Italians were afraid of being Italian. They changed their names, they stopped speaking the language. And if you look at the history of, public history of Italians in the United States, it's kind of one disgrace after another, beginning with lynchings in New Orleans, going to Sacco and Vanzetti. When you get to the 1940s and 50s, you get the 30s, 40s, and 50s, you get the mobsters, and so on and so on. And now we're getting all, the tail, what I call the tail end of the Hollywood feedback. It seems to me whenever something historical happens in the United States, it happens in reality, then it gets fed back to the people in media, through the media, and so what happens is people end up acting the way they see themselves on these screens. Not everybody, but to me, there's very little difference between what you see in Jersey Shore and what you saw back in Little Caesar. It's kind of an extended sense of this is what Italians are. They're buffoons. They push people around. They're wild about sex, and they're gluttons, and so on and so forth. These kids act this way because that's the way they saw Italians being portrayed. And so until we get smart, and we've gotten smart over the years with the American Italian Historical Association was founded in the 1960s. Here we are almost 50 years later, still beginning to teach our own people about our past. And this book, I think, it's a wonderful book. I've been using it in teaching. A lot of people have. We went out of print. We're going back. They printed out the first run, and now they're printing more. And I think it's just the beginning. Sure, it's based on a lot of things that came before, whether it was Sal Legumina's WAP and so on. But now we're talking about speaking to the people. And one of the things I do in my essay or my introduction is to try to talk about why Italian Americans have become invisible. Ralph Ellison wrote a book called Invisible Man, and he said, black people are invisible because others refuse to see them. And what I say in my essay is Italian Americans are invisible because they refuse to be seen. And to me, this is the key, because often when I come out as an Italian American, people will say, well, what do you have to complain about? You don't have the problems that the Jews have. You don't have the problems that the blacks have. You didn't have to suffer through the things that the Irish did and so on. And I say, well, wait a minute. We have our story. In fact, my whole life career as a professor of Italian American studies, and there are not that many, there's many people who study Italian American culture, but people whose titles are designated Italian American. In fact, many of the people who teach Italian American studies have come into Italian American studies through the Italian route. Very few through the American, well, I shouldn't say very few. In social sciences, they did come through the American route, but they didn't come through because there were programs in Italian American studies where you can get your PhD. There's very few of those even now. So in my essay, I talk about the sense of why we have become invisible people and the effect that's had, and the impact this fear has on maintaining this ignorance. A lot of Italian Americans don't want to hear about the misery of the past. And so when they go to an event, they want to hear about the glory of Rome. They want to hear about the wonders of the Medici legacy that left this incredible art to the world and so on. And they want to leave it at that. They're like my grandmother who didn't want to talk about the miseria. Why? Because miseria presents a brutta figura. And the foundation of Italian culture, and I've known this for a long time, but recently, last spring, I was in Italy teaching and hanging out with the professors and going to conferences and so on. And God forbid you should criticize somebody in public because that makes them look bad. And and I think that's what compounds this notion in the United States. Besides the fact of what Bill and other people have uncovered in terms of these incredible images that have appeared over and over and over again. What's happening now is, based on this book, I believe, and my work, Bill's work, Dominic's work, there's a lot of young scholars, especially in Italy, I would say almost more in Italy than in the United States, who are looking at this history and saying, wait a minute, that's not, the picture I had in my history book is not what I am learning about now. The same way Bill talked about those paintings and photos as being kind of new ways of looking at this period and looking at Italian history and understanding, the interactions between the economy and cultural developments. The same thing is happening today with young students. I gave a talk in Italy about Italian-American studies, and I said the future of Italian-American studies is here in Italy. And this professor got up at the end and he says, well, excuse me, professore, but I think the future is in the United States. The United States has all this money, and the Italian-Americans are very wealthy there, and they have, and I said, well, what you're over, he says, and we have nothing here. We have nothing here. I said, what you're overlooking is the greatest treasure that you have, the greatest resource that you have for this kind of risorgimento of Italian-American studies, and that is your own students. Right now I'm sitting on a couple of dissertation committees of students in Italy, and I've done so for the last few years. And popping up throughout the United States are students who see this as a viable field of study, whereas back when Dominic was going to school, Dominic had to fight his way into doing Italian-American studies, and many people like Dominic, Italian-American studies was not considered to be legitimate enough for them to build a career, and so they had to resort doing other, what we would call more mainstream studies. And Italian-American studies became kind of like, considered to be a hobby inside the academy. Well, I think we've done what we needed to do to change that around. Now we need to concentrate on the Italian-American community itself. And it's beginning to be there. We would not have Bill Connell in this room right now, although I'm not there, I feel like I'm there, if it wasn't for the Italian-American organization Unicom, and other Italian-Americans who gave money to a university. Now, when I was growing up, you never gave money to a public institution that taxed you. Why would you do that? Seton Hall is a private school, but Stony Brook University, where I used to teach, they raised almost $2 million. A lot of other schools are beginning. And so when you ask Italian Americans to contribute to the culture, we went through at least 3 generations that did not really consider college a necessity for making it in America. In fact, when I was growing up, I went to Fenwick High School, and I was considered to be kind of a, even back then, when I went to work, they would call me professor. Who do you think you are to try to be so smart? What you should really be doing is studying a trade. Even the counselors at Fenwick, when I went there, were suggesting that I might not apply to Harvard, that I should probably go to a state school, because Italian Americans were considered to be that. So even though Fenwick is a great school and I was in the top half of my class, I was not counseled towards higher education and kind of fumbled my way through this. And so I think what happens when you put a book like this out and you put it in the library and it's there, young people will stumble on it and build from here the way that we had to build from a much lower foundation. And I think I'm going to leave it right there for now, and either, I don't know what we're going to do next, open up for questions. I know we're going to see the video, which I think would be great to see. Do you have to, can I see the video? I mean, I've seen it 3 or 4 times. Are you going to show?
I don't think so, but we can.
All right, then what I will do
What
is
did you see during Bill's presentation?
I spent so much time of my life inside that very room where you people are. And for the first time in my life, I've been able to meditate not only on the people in the audience, but on the painting in the background.
Okay, so you saw that. Well, we'll train the camera on the screen, and maybe you can see it.
Okay.
Okay. So, Bill, you want to start the video?
Oh, yeah, sure. This is, and you'll get it from YouTube then, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I can probably try to do that. Fred, get smaller.
So this is
You can make me small, but don't worry about it. I mean, I've seen the film a million times. I'll hear it, and I'll never.
So again, this is an 8-minute version of a half-hour documentary filmed at Seton Hall University in South Orange, New Jersey, about 5 years ago. And we brought together not just academics. Most of the academics are edited out, although I think we have Fred speaking eloquently as always in the 8 minutes that are left. But then there are politicians, some actors, Joe Piscopo and Tony Lobianco, and some activists from Unico, the Sons of Italy, and they speak to the feelings of many Italian Americans about situations in the past and sometimes in the present, but that tend not to be voiced. And I took as a challenge to get these people to speak for the camera so that we could hear their true feelings about these issues.
Let me go to YouTube.
Don't worry, if you lose me, I'll still be here orally.
This, you? Okay.
No, I'm not.
I just,
The Italian version.
No, you room.
okay. And then, are we there yet?
No,
No, click on the link. No.
Okay, and then let's go to anti-Italian.
Oh.
Italianism?
Are you trying to get to YouTube?
Yeah.
Not there yet.
You were there before,
Oh, well, let's see.
almost. Type YouTube in again on the top.
Oh, that's you. Okay.